Thank you, William, and good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for a good morning response. That helps. I've decided not to use PowerPoints. So that means that I'm going to ask you all to help me this morning. So it's going to be not exactly call and response, but I am going to ask you to be engaged, and to not be shy. So I'm surprising some of my colleagues, and I've given them a little hint that we're going to ask them to get involved. I think the moment yesterday, in response to Natalie's question, the moment yesterday that really sort of touched my heart in a deep way, there were several moments, but there was one in particular. When Governor Winter, there were two when he spoke, when he said he almost couldn't believe his eyes, what he was seeing. And I agree with the speaker later who said that because this group was an integrated group and they were here to deal with the real issues, it does show tremendous progress for the state of Mississippi and for our country.
Amen.
But the other thing was, and we had this amazing experience where Governor Winter and Mrs. Evers were on the stage together in New Orleans, and when he said that he had said when Medgar Evers was killed, he died not just for blacks, but he also, this work frees the chains of slavery for whites as well. And it's a reminder to me of how this work is about all of us. And the video, one of the things about the video, and one of the reasons we wanted to show it, is that it does capture the nuance, a nuance of the Kellogg Foundation's work on racial healing and racial equity, and that is that it is an inclusive approach. It is about the belief, and that's the bottom line, the belief in racial difference, the belief in racial hierarchy. And once that belief became a way of life, and it wasn't always that way, by the way, but it has been that way for almost 500 years. But once that belief became a way of life, it allows the otherizing, to use John Powell's expression, the otherizing of difference. So there's this one sort of accepted view of humanity, which is ridiculously based on physical characteristics, based on the lack of pigmentation, the contour of the facial features, the physical structure of reproduction. So that's supposed to be the pinnacle of humanity. And everybody else is not. Everybody else is other. So whether and it is African American, and it is Latino, and it is Asian American, and so that's that belief that we're trying to just pull up by the roots. You ever seen a tree fall over in a storm? You seen that big root ball, There's this big root ball, and it's called racism. It's a belief. And so the work of changing a belief, it is hard work. But I'm going to share with you this morning some of the lessons I've learned in this work. But one that comes most often recently is I now understand at a very deep level what nonviolence meant and what this biblical expression, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. I really understand that at a level that I never thought I would. And that's what racial healing is about, because when you really understand the belief that has caught us all up, you do get to that space.
All right.
And you want it, I'm not saying you aren't challenged by it. I'm not saying you don't want to slap somebody sometimes, because you do, But if you step back, you do understand that they really don't know. That they are caught up in a mythology that says it's okay. to dehumanize and devalue and deny opportunity. And there are all kind of ways to rationalize that mythology. They're not smart enough, you know, they need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, they're not my kind of people, but it's the they stuff, you know. But that's just a rationalization for this belief that we have all grown up with. So the racial healing work is really, and I want to, if you don't take anything else away today, please take away the understanding that it is this belief that we're trying to uproot. Now that means a lot, because most of us are in denial that such a belief exists. My background is as a holistic physician, naturopath, naturopath, and clinical nutritionist. And I spent a lot of years trying to get people to change their behaviors, right? And I recognize that denial is an important tool. It's a resource we have to keep from changing, you know? I often use the metaphor of gaining weight, right? So when you're in denial about gaining weight, you just buy a different style of clothes. You all know about that. Ladies, you really know about that, right?
Stop it.
You don't get a different size, you get a different style. You know, it's a little more loose, right? But the first level of denial is denial of fact. And somebody this morning called for more awareness, and that's really the first level of the work, right? Because we contend that, you know, we had a civil war in this country to end the enslavement experience, and we had a civil rights movement. But we contend that neither of those major experiences in US history dealt with the belief in racial superiority. It dealt with the effects of that belief, but it didn't deal with that belief. And so that's the work we're inviting you to become a part of. So some people say, what will racial healing, or what will it look like when we achieve racial equity? Well, you know how kids read in their textbooks that at one time we believed the world was flat, right? I look forward to the day when our children will read, at one time we believed in the absurdity of racial hierarchy. Okay?
Okay.
Sit with that for a minute, right?
Mama.
All right? When our children will open their books and they'll look back and they will be told that this was a fallacy upon which we built this nation. It's in the Constitution. So we got some work to do.
Oh, yeah.
Now the question is, how do we get up to the task? How do we do it? How do we become so centered in ourselves, so committed, and I would submit to you, so filled with love for our fellow human beings, that we rise to this task? Because it ain't easy. And I'm going to have some of my colleagues from the Kellogg Foundation share with you a little bit about the Foundation's journey along this continuum. And we are not there. So I'm not trying to suggest that we're some kind of experts. But we have, and this is what humbles me about being a part of the Kellogg Foundation. From the board of directors to every person in this organization, we have the courage to try. And for that, I applaud the Kellogg Foundation. Would you join me? And when we first started this work, you know, some of our other foundation colleagues, they sort of said, right on, go ahead. We're willing to talk about diversity. We're willing to talk about multiculturalism. But this race thing, y'all go ahead. Do that. Because you know you can talk about diversity, and you can talk about inclusion, and you can talk about multiculturalism, and never once deal with the issue of racism.
Say so.
Okay. But that's changed, and we're going to talk a little bit about how much that's changed in terms of the field of philanthropy in a short period of time. You will see the word race and racism surfacing. But I also want to reinforce another illustration of the Foundation's commitment to this work, and it was really consciousness shifting for me. But the Foundation understands that racism is a global issue. And we have decided to, after the board had spent many years investing in Brazil, the board decided that their legacy for Brazil would be to create a foundation in Brazil to deal with the issue of racism in Brazil. Now, has anybody here ever been to Brazil? All right. So we think we have a problem with racism. No pun intended, our issues pale in comparison to what's going on in Brazil. Brazil was the epicenter of the experience of enslavement of Africans. They were the first, they were the alpha and the omega of this brutality. And the eugenics movement really took hold in Brazil. So one of those life-changing experiences for me, we went there recently and we went to the marketplace. And I stood on the grounds. The red bricks where my ancestors were bought and sold and tortured for 4 centuries.
Yes.
Okay. And there's not even a plaque. Not even a plaque that honors their lives. In preparation for the trip to Brazil, I did some reading, and the UNESCO done a lot of work on trying to break the silence about the pervasiveness of the experience of enslavement. And they put together an amazing curriculum, and you can go online and download it. And this curriculum tells the story of the impact of enslavement on the global marketplace. And it gives they engaged people from all over the world, all over the Americas, university professors. And you know, I'm no spring chicken here, you know, I mean, I've been around a while. And I've read about race and racism and slavery, you know, forever. But I had never seen one place where all of this was compiled in a multi-perspective point of view, chronologically. So, and it's 800 pages. I really encourage you to go and download it and read it. But at one point, this commerce system of enslaving people from Africa was the dominant commerce of the world. For almost 200 years.
All right.
I want you to sit with that for a minute. The dominant commerce of the world. What's the dominant commerce of the world today? What do you think? Anybody? Oil? I think it might be oil. I'm not an economist. Anybody in the room? It might one day be information. You know, at one point in our history it was agriculture. But for 400 years it was the bodies and souls and hearts and minds of people from Africa. And so this particular piece of work coming out of UNESCO not only talks about, you know, the Middle Passage and what happened in the Americas and what happened in the United States, it also tells what it did to the continent of Africa. It talks about how the royal family's wealth came from that. And it makes you see the world differently. So I strongly urge that you read it, because some people push back and they say, well, there's always been slavery. There's slavery today. But that was the only period in which it was the dominant commerce of the world. Okay? It is the commerce upon which the new world was built.
Oh, yes.
So, we got a lot of work to do. America's only 250 or so, 230 something years old, right? But this process of enslaving and selling and devaluing and profiting from people and annihilating others and exploiting others, that went on as a form of, let me put it this way, our laws sanctioned it, our religions condoned it,
Oh, yes. Yes.
our culture celebrated it for 400 years. So when people say we're in a post-racial America, no. So that's the work, and I wanted, the video sort of hints at it, but I wanted folks to understand that that's really the work. Now, how do we go about this work? How do we propose to be a soldier in this, I don't like violent metaphors, but a soldier in this war against this, the absurdity of this belief and its consequences? Well, I will tell you a little bit about Kellogg's journey to get to this point and what it has meant for the foundation. Better yet, I'll ask LaJune to tell you a little bit about Kellogg's journey. June, would you talk a little bit about, because you've been there 25 years, and you led some of this work in the foundation, so. But you gotta stand up. You gotta talk to the group. I don't think she likes me very much right now.
Actually, as Gail mentioned, I'm really proud of the journey that the Kellogg Foundation has been on, and she's dead right to say that there was a level of acknowledgement and awareness way before there was movement, deep, real movement in the organization. But I think the most important point in Kellogg's journey happened about 25 years ago, and we had a leader in the organization, I think he was president, and then we also had a chief executive officer, so he was kind of second in command in the organization, a white male who had a meeting at the Kellogg Foundation and brought in many people from the community. And after the meeting ended, one other person from the community walked up to him and said, you know, I'm really surprised at what I'm observing here at the Kellogg Foundation, because you've been in our community encouraging inclusiveness, and yet we've come now to your community and there are no people of color here. And for the first time, he was actually made aware of a disconnect in the Kellogg Foundation's voice versus their practices. And he set upon a journey to correct that. And so, in what he knew how to do, he went out and recruited people of color from all over the country to come and work at the Kellogg Foundation. I was one of those first people. But that's what he had in his heart to do. And many of us came because of that vision and that passion and thought this was exactly where I want to be. But you all realize that you don't just bring a bunch of people in the room of different colors and hues and thoughts and it just works, right? So from that point until now, we have been on a journey to actually embrace that level of diversity in a real way and to actually leverage the type of thoughts and perspectives and experiences of those individuals. And we're still working at it. Gail mentioned over the years we've had different people in our organization that have led this work, both white people as well as people of color. And what we've learned is it takes both. And Sterling has been a real leader in this work since he's arrived at the Kellogg Foundation. And I'm sure Gail is also going to ask Sterling to speak just because she's a fair and balanced person. But yesterday, John Paul talked about a concept of invisibility. And sometimes that was how you felt at the Kellogg Foundation as a person of color. And we're learning more currently now that there's this act of minimization, so that what did happen, and now we're more aware of that and actually trying to address that. But in the early days, it was bring all these people of color into the Kellogg Foundation, and now let's give them practices and policies and expectations that they all act the same. And those who didn't act the same somehow didn't quite fit. And so there's been some, attrition that happens during that process. But we're getting better. We are absolutely getting better because we now, as Gail mentioned, we have the courage to talk about it. We have the courage to examine ourselves. We've examined our practices. We've had everyone in the organization go through many series of training. More recently, the concept of what it means to minimize and ways of creating policies and practices that acknowledge that and that think about that. And in fact, today what we're doing is we were about to go through a great service approach at the Kellogg Foundation and really talk about what it means to give good service to our grantees and to ourselves, because those who are served will give good service. And so we've been talking about that. And our first endeavor was to set up new standards and set up new policies and talk about what everybody needs to do to give great service. And we almost launched it before we had some external consultants come in and look at it from a racial equity lens. And what we learned was, here we were again perpetuating what we know how to do. And we've since revised the policies, revised the standards, and talked about how it's not one size fits all, and we can't sort of impose our beliefs on others who have different beliefs. So that's just one example of the type of journey we've been on, and it has been a journey. We've all had scars and bruises along the way, and many other people from the Kellogg Foundation can give you how they've experienced it, because I can tell you everyone in the organization has experienced this work in some way or another. Every last person, including the board. And many times when we've taken on a new initiative, they've joined us and taken it on with us. So that's just a small example. I know Gail has many others, but talk to us anytime. There's work to be done, and we have the courage and the muscles to keep doing the work.
Let's give LaJune a hand. LaJune has so much energy at the foundation. Sometimes I give her vitamins to slow slow down. One of the high points in the journey this year, quite surprisingly, when we launched this work, there was a lot of press and a lot of local press and a lot of national press, but of course the only thing that got attention was this negative editorial that appeared in the Wall Street Journal. And this recognized expert from Harvard, Stephen Thernstrom, wrote this scathing editorial where he said this was the biggest boondoggle in the history of philanthropy, and Kellogg would be much better to spend their money on education. And of course, obviously he didn't do his homework, because we do spend money on education. But somehow, by some way of indirect sabotage intention, there was a debate arranged, and we were invited to debate Thernstrom. I specifically was invited to debate this because he's a recognized expert on the issue of race in America. He and his wife sits on the Civil Rights Commission. So, you know, they are the citadel of knowledge about race. So anyway, the occasion for the debate came about. And if you haven't seen it, I really encourage you to go to YouTube and see it. And we can make sure you have the link to it. But Sterling really, his presence there as a white male CEO of this foundation said more than words can express, you know? And sometimes being who you are is more powerful than what you say even, you know? And so I'm gonna ask, although what Sterling said was very powerful, and there was a particular moment where he really broke the room up because he quoted Chris Rock. And he said, he talked about this joke where, you know, the professor, I'll let Sterling tell the story. So Sterling, would you share with the group some of your insights gleaned as the CEO of this 5th largest foundation in the world, taking this stand?
Feels like Oprah here. And I only want to say, it's not to draw attention to ourselves as much as to reveal ourselves and the foundation, because if we're going to be long-term partners, you do have to understand how we got to be here right now. And as Gail and Lejeune said, we are just on the same journey you all are on. And so as a white guy, you know, and also our personal journeys also interweave with where we find ourselves with this great band of brothers and sisters at any one time. But you know, one of the great things about white privilege is you only have to deal with race when you want to. You know, when it's either in your face and you can't avoid it, or someone says, hey, would you come on down and help? And you know, I'm going to be 64 next week, so I was in college when Detroit was burning and when LA was burning, and we were reading Stokely Carmichael and we were studying structural racism. But when we went back home and went to work on laboring crews in Detroit and worked with black men and saw them with their trunks full of TVs from the riots, and these were not criminals, you know, these were hard-working guys who were my mentors. And then you go to New Detroit, where all the adults are gathered around worried about what they're going to do about what's happened in their city, and I realized these people don't have a clue. And I read 2 books, and I think I understand it. But it's interesting when Lejeune described what Norm Brown did 25 years ago. About that same time, our board of directors that had been all white males, one white woman managed to sneak onto the board in the early years. It was about the same time, about 1984, 1985, where the first African-American male was nominated to the board of directors. But as we all know, having one of those and one of those and one of those doesn't tend to change the dynamic of talking about race. But over time, when I came to the foundation, Lejeune and a lot of people had been working on a diversity action committee, getting training. Every staff person got some training on healing racism, and it had had some positive effect, but it was also one of those earnest attempts at trying to educate people. But the foundation, we all know that it's the authorizing environment in an organization that either allows people to do something a little risky or not. So whereas my predecessor, also a white male, had said diversity, we have to capitalize on diversity, and had said we need to do these trainings, it was still a sense of the staff that, yeah, we can do that, but how far are we going to go? And especially like most staffs in foundations, and what does the board think about all this? So I came in kind of earnest. I went through my 2 days of healing racism training, and but people kept saying, the board, what about the board? And I said, well, why don't we sit down and talk to the board about that? And why don't we bring in the trainers, Valerie Batts from Visions, and do some healing racism with the board? Now you have to realize, by the time I interviewed for my job in 2005, there's only one white male on the Kellogg Foundation board. And it didn't occur to me until my second interview. It's like, oh, that really, boy, for a big private foundation, that's amazing to see that kind of diversity. So we took Valerie to the board, and over a couple of months, we did healing racism. And And then we said, Board of Directors of Kellogg, what do you want to tell the staff about this work? And it was at that point where they made the very provocative challenge to the staff, and they said, we want the Kellogg Foundation to strive to be the most effective anti-racist organization that it can be. Whoa, that quote was, well, it helped us recruit people like Gail Christophers, who everybody who came to an interview as we were hiring new leadership said, whoa, what is that? Are you serious? And what does that mean? Now, of course, a lot of white people at the foundation said, who you calling racist? And, you know, so you'll notice our language has moved to promoting racial equity, and again, thanks to Gail and others, and the veterans like Lejeune, it's about healing, and it's true, you know, it's not stopping to protest, and you know, Dr. King, even Jim Joseph at the Council Foundation said, it's not that you don't take demonstrations and aggressive actions and never use them, but I think for the long run, that's what it's been. Now, the other thing you have to understand about the Kellogg Foundation is one of our African-American male trustees keeps saying, we are not a civil rights organization. We are a shirt sleeves Midwestern foundation, gosh and golly. But when we take seriously the mission to change the conditions for vulnerable kids, and we ask ourselves, what causes kids to be vulnerable? And you saw it on the video yesterday. What was the first thing that popped up? Racism and poverty, and the fact that poor kids of color grow up surrounded by lots of other poor kids of color. It's like we just said, it's just part of our mission. Now, I like to play the race card and say, Mr. Kellogg was the son of abolitionists. You know, our foundation is built on the site of the Underground Railroad in Battle Creek. You know, Sojourner Truth came to Battle Creek and spent the last 25 years of her life in Battle Creek. You know, so now, what Gail didn't say is, one of our former trustees, a white male, wrote a letter to the Wall Street Journal saying he didn't think Mr. Kellogg would have approved of this racial equity work. Now, I would say all the changes that have occurred at the foundation since I've come weren't based on what Sterling Spearman wanted to do, it was based on what our founder, Will Keith Kellogg, wanted us to do. Now, I don't think you can ever debate what someone who died in 1951 would or wouldn't have done around racial equity. But I remember what he said is, do whatever you please, so long as it promotes the health, happiness, and well-being of children. So to Gail's great context setting, we too are just on this journey. When, as you said, the first thing, we need more awareness. You know, as a white person, throughout life, like, oh, your awareness grows a little bit and you go back to business as usual. But as Gail said, you can't deny facts. You have to change beliefs. But day to day, especially for a white person, it's like, I've got to learn how to behave differently. And the nice thing about racism is it brings you awkward moments every day of your life that you have a chance to think about your behavior and your implicit assumptions about normality. And the invisible white privilege and white supremacy that white people live in all the time. So we've really pushed into some whole new territories on, first, just getting comfortable about talking about race. So, okay, talking doesn't solve any problems, but at least it says, you know, but it just keeps reminding people it's always at play. But as Gail said, and the term minimization, although yesterday I was really, really daunted by the comments made about Mississippi and the challenges we face here. That there, you know, if there are 5 levels of human development in coming to grips with this, the very bottom of that is certainly those people that are in denial. And they just don't want to hear it. There are no differences among people, or they may think there are, but that people that do admit their differences are in the next level, which is polarization. Yeah, there's differences, and I'm better than you. And that was the belief system that maybe has been in effect for so many centuries. For those of us who think we're enlightened and we get it, and we're always there for the rally, we might have made it into this middle, where most of us are, minimization. Yes, there's differences, and we know that we should all work together, but we don't change our day-to-day behaviors. We still live in the world of white privilege or the dominant culture and others. For those of us, and it's not consciousness, it's where do you go? Where do you go to the fitness gym to work on your racial behaviors? You know, how do you learn just to behave differently, or as Lejeune just described, once again, like, oh, yeah, we're doing the racial healing over here, but we got to do this thing over here. What's the connection? Are you going to talk about race again? It's like, yes, you talk about it all the time as a developmental challenge. So if you can move into an adaptation where in fact, oh, you wake up every day and you actually are behaving, not from your position, but from a bigger position. And I said, that's just the journey we're on. And I poke fun at us too. So our team has had a film festival we sponsor, and I heard about 3 great films I want to see now. Awareness building, our trainers tell us, is a strategy used for people that are in denial or in polarization. People in minimization, I get that there are different cultures and different food and different historical values. But if you show me another film about how people are different, it's not helping me learn how to behave differently today. When I'm out working with a grantee, I'm in a community, I need to go somewhere else where it's not just films, it's practice. And so I said, that's where we are. And every day, you know, we have this aha or oh no, and we just keep working. So what's great, and I think probably one reason we are in Mississippi too, is race is in your face. And as you saw in the film in New Mexico, race is in your face. Probably Michigan's the one where mostly it's, oh, we're the North, or, you know, it's, you know. Anyway, so I just want to say we're on a journey, as Gail and Lejeune said. We are just, these are just developmental stages people go through. And if you can help us get a little bit better, or we can help you, but it is core, as Gail said now, it is core to our work. Our board is fully supportive of that, and we know every problem worthy of attack proves its worth by attacking back. Yeah. So if one of our former trustees is not happy with what we're doing, it's probably because we're doing the right thing. So thank you all for being on this journey with us.
Sterling, tell us the Chris Rock joke.
Well, again, I also seen a study where a professor said to his students, okay, to the white students, I'm going to make you black. What do I have to pay you to make that change? Put a dollar amount on what you would be if you were born black and not white. And it came out to about $50 million. Or someone be willing to give up white privilege. Chris Rock said it even more funny. He said, I'm a successful black man, the world's at my feet. I would rather be that one-legged white busboy in the back of the room, you know, some days. So I don't know how I threw that into the mix, but that's a little preaching to the choir, and I don't want that either, because healing, as Gail says, it's not be they, it's got to be us, and there are challenging times when it's hard to feel that. But so I just want to thank you all, and that's the Kellogg Foundation.
Keeping it real. So what I want to do in the time that I have left, and how much is that now? Really? Wow. Okay. It's very important to never lose sight of the economic reality of this 400-year experience of commerce, if you will. So in 2009, the average net worth of white households in America is $113,149. Okay. The average net worth of Hispanic households in America is $6,325. The average net worth of black households in America is $5,677. So if anybody ever tells you we're in a post-racialized America, you know what to say. Okay. The board approved our approach, which was basically we had 4 objectives that we're working on. And I had no idea the time would go so fast. I didn't think my colleagues would be so long-winded, but it's wonderful. It's good. We had 4 objectives. One of them was that we would work toward a national system of accountability. Because what happens is, it happened in Reconstruction, it happened in the Civil Rights era. What happens is you make 10 steps forward on this. But then there's the backlash. You see it today, you know, in so many forms. And so we believe if we ever really are successful, our nation will own this and will say, we realize this was absurd and that we have to track our progress in dealing with it. Now, but we understand that before we will ever get there as a nation, you know, there has to be this collective consciousness shift. And so one of the big takeaways in this first phase of the work has been this idea of unconscious bias. So for those of you who were at Asheville, how many were in the Asheville gathering in the room? A few. And we're going to do it in New Orleans again this year, bringing together all our racial equity grantees. One of the ideas that was presented, and we fund a lot of this work, we're going to open it with this conversation this year. Because all of this, it's become the water we swim in. And this bias is not always conscious, you know? It works unconsciously. You know, it's the TV commercials that you see that reinforce it, you know? It's the information in the textbooks in the classroom. It's how you react to an interracial couple. I'd like everybody to stand up who's ever had a personal experience of racism. Personal. Where you were the recipient, you felt, of racism. All right. Now I'd like everyone to, no, stay standing. Everyone to sit down who has gone a day in their lives without consciousness of their racial identity. If you have gone one day in your life without thinking about what color you were. Now I want you to look around the room. Imagine what it's like to get up every morning, to have to arm your children so that every day of their lives, they know how to navigate the legacy of 400 years. Everybody sit down. There's something about living with that reality every day. I remember once I dated someone from another race, and we were at a restaurant, and the waitress decided not to wait on us. And he stood up, and he yelled at her, and he demanded that she get over there and wait on our table immediately. And she scurried over, and she said, "I'm sorry, sir, I'm sorry, sir." And I sat there aghast. I said, oh my God, if that had been a black man, they would have drug him out. The police. You know what I'm saying? The police. It wouldn't have been pretty. And it was one of those moments, you know, where I realized that he didn't hesitate for 1 second to assert his protection and his privilege. You know? So those are the kinds of experiences that remind us of where we are today, not where we're going. So we're spending a lot of our efforts in this first phase to raise public awareness. Videos and movies and articles in the newspapers and op-eds and just trying to get, and local communities. So we want to be able to help shift the conversation here in Mississippi to where people understand what they're dealing with. But there's a history of Mississippi that predates the Civil Rights Movement. And so when you talk about the history of Mississippi, I would just ask you to consider that long continuum that dates back 400 or 500 years. You know, what was this area like before it was Mississippi? And what happened in Mississippi for all those decades? We hear about the killing of Medgar Evers, and we hear about the 3 civil rights workers. For every one of those, there are 4,000 or 5,000 more that no one ever talks about. All right. So, but you gotta deal with that history in order to reconcile it, in order to come to grips with it. Our next objective was to enhance community-based capacity. And so we put out an RFP. We thought we'd get a few hundred responses for local communities who were willing to do this hard work. We got about 1,000 responses. And we're still trying to keep our funding flowing so that we can fund all the goodwill. That's the other learning from this work so far. People want to do this. Now I know you get a lot of people who don't. Somebody said it, I don't want to have that. But on the other side of that, there are people who do. And there's a lot of goodwill in this country that would like to deal with this, would like to, as our people say at the foundation, wrestle this one to the ground. So we're funding small, and we will do that. Somebody talked about capacity, part of our work here in Mississippi, and William will talk more about it. We're doing it in New Orleans. The mayor is leading the work in New Orleans on this racial healing work. He stepped up at least and committed to it, which is pretty powerful. So, but we would like to be able to support. We have the Winter Institute is a major grantee of ours, but we also want to support a lot more local efforts to do this work. Why? Because we want people to come at this idea of increasing the life options for vulnerable children from their hearts. Okay? We want people to think that it's more than just providing more services. Right? It's changing the culture where the expectation is equality, where the expectation is equity. But you won't get there until some hearts have changed and people have had permission to acknowledge this absurdity with which we all live. The third thing that we put a lot of our objective was to fund what we call action-oriented research. The work of Dolores Acevedo Garcia, the work of David Williams, the work of others who help us to hone in on the reality of the effects of the legacy in quantifiable ways. Because you need the research. The data does not move people to action. If it did, we wouldn't be where we are. Because there's been a lot of data out there for a long time. But it does provide the tools and the resources to keep driving the action once the hearts have been changed to the point where they want to take the action. Then you use the data as tools. But data alone will never change America. Because the beliefs are still there, and you find a way to rationalize and justify the disparity. And then finally, we wouldn't be in this room today if it weren't for the work of the NAACP, the Urban League, the National Council of La Raza, the Children's Defense Fund. There are many groups who have stood up and fought the good fight. And I read a quote somewhere once that said, there's no shame in defeat when you're fighting evil. There's only shame in not fighting. And evil is just the word live spelled backwards. And so in many ways, you know, this idea is just living backwards, you know, denying the humanity of folks. So those are the four kind of sort of foundation speak objectives around our racial equity, racial healing work. We've attempted to do structural issues and healing issues simultaneously. We don't think it's a one or the other conversation. But the structure shows up in education. It shows up in the healthcare system. It shows up in the economics. And one of the places that we just won't deal with, is sort of like a shh, is residential segregation. All right? Place matters. And if you disinvest in communities and you concentrate poverty in communities, where's the opportunity there for children? And so structure shows up in residential segregation, which then determines the funding for the schools, and it determines the transportation, determines the air quality, because the waste dumps are in those same communities, and it goes on and on and on. But healing, we believe, has to happen before we will have a permanent will to address the structural difference, you see? So I'm going to close, because I'm about there, right, Madeline? Okay, be my profession, you know, because I think I know a little bit about healing. And this professor at Harvard has written a book which he calls Remembered Wellness. Herbert Benson. And Benson basically is saying that the body knows what it is to be well, and to be whole. And the efforts that we use to heal should help the body to remember that. And the implication there is that there's an intelligence in the body. And so this idea of healing is informed by the concept of remembering our wholeness as a human family. And at a deep level, at an unconscious level, we know we are one human family. Now, the human genome has reminded us of that. We are 99.9% the same. Okay. And that these physical changes that we've all experienced, these adaptations, whether we are dark or light, or curly hair or straight hair, or wide nostrils or narrow nostrils, or big lips or thin lips, they were all intelligent adaptations to our environments in which our ancestors evolved. Because the human body has one mandate, which is survival. And it adapts so that it optimizes our chances for survival. So to take that brilliance of the human body, that adaptation, and use it as a tool to destroy life is living backwards. So we won't always win every battle in this journey, as I'm sure our current president can attest to. But our challenge is to stay strong and keep our resolve solid. And ultimately, and I say this from the bottom of my heart because it is my prayer every day, because when we are so angry and so outraged, we are paralyzed sometimes, and our effectiveness is diminished. And as Dr. King, I think, would say, you know, we have to find that quiet place within to go in and seek love and seek guidance and be able to move from a place of forgiveness. Because most of us who are caught up in out-picturing this nonsense, most of us who are doing it are not aware of when we're doing it. We're not aware of how we're doing it. And most times we don't even know why we're doing it. And so that biblical expression, forgive them for they know not what they do, it's real in this work. And you are much more powerful in this work if you can be in that place of knowing at the moment of challenge. And not be reactive, but acting from a place of strength. So we're going to spend some time in small groups together this morning. Now, we don't have time to get into real serious racial healing work, okay? So don't panic. We're not gonna ask you to, we're not gonna ask you to bare your souls today. But we have a couple of questions that we are gonna ask you to engage in conversation, and so as to both facilitate your knowing each other better, and I think on a deeper level, perhaps learning and beginning to trust each other more. Because if we are afraid that the person we're working with is gonna, you know, stab us, then we're not gonna be authentic in those interactions with them. And we're not gonna get much done. But William is leading what he hopes will be a community of folks. Well, this is a lot of people here in this room. And if all of you are able to mobilize the 500 others that you all know, we're talking about a force here in Mississippi for real change. But it starts with trust. Well, I won't say it starts with trust, but trust has to emerge there. And so this opportunity we're going to engage you in right now will be a baby step toward building some more of that trust. We're going to ask you to come together as a group, and we're in those small groups, and you've got little badges, numbers, I think, right, pieces of paper, right? You're going to do that part?
We're going to pause because we have to do a break, and then we're going to have beloved
Oh.
to do their session, and then you're going to give instructions.
I'm sorry.
No problem.
Duh. Got a little ahead of myself there, please forgive me. But we are going to ultimately break into small groups, and you're going to do some work in those groups to talk about more of this work. But I've given you sort of the scaffolding, if you will, and the history of, and our colleagues of why Kellogg is doing this work. Our main objective here was to hope to get you to believe that we're real in this work, and to enlist your partnership in this work. But I know that you're dealing with this every day and you're living with it, and my hat is off to you for the courage and the determination that you exhibit on a daily basis. Thank you.